Hello, my name's Gloria Erickson and I work for Dovetail Partners. I am the Community Wildfire Project Manager. Dovetail is also the contracted St. Louis County Firewise Coordinator in Minnesota. We are filming the panel discussion on the Fond du Lac Lake Superior Band of Ojibwe Reservation here in northern Minnesota. And I would like to introduce or have my guests introduce themselves.
I'm Vern Northrup. I'm a retired wildland fire operations specialist. I've been retired about 10 years, but I still have a great interest and take in what you are trying to accomplish here.
And Vern is very humble. I am going to say he also is a revered elder here at Fond du Lac.
Thank you.
Damon?
Buju, Dinwe Maganaduk, Damon Gejibedeg Panek is my name, and am the new wildland fire operations specialist for the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Ojibwe. Trying to fill big shoes that Vern left behind. So the word Oshkigin is the word that we use for the spirit of fire, but in the Ojibwe language is very expressive, and it usually when we translate to English we lose some of the meaning that's built into the word. And when you look at the word Oshkigin, the gun on the end of it is a suffix that we use to make a verb into a noun, and what that refers to is the thing that makes it happen. And oshke is the word that we use for something that's new or something that's fresh or something that's young. And so Oshkigin translates into the spirit of fire, but what it literally refers to is the thing that makes things new, the mechanism to make things new or young again. So it's a really interesting way of looking at that. There's a lot of meaning that's built into the language, and that's what you get when you learn words that are, or learn the distinct parts of words. It's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask each one of you, why did you want to be part of this film?
Well, first of all, fire was my career, and part of that was being a prescribed fire burn boss. And I always thought of that as another tool that we used, to manage our forest. And but the Ojibwe used, the Anishinaabe used it to manage their world. Wherever they lived, they managed their world with fire. Their environment for hunting or for growing new, anew, especially blueberries. That was key for that. Mm-hmm. But also clearing the understory. If you look at our forests now, you can't see 100 feet in them. And using that fire like that, it kept it cleared. There's some of our old growth forests where still has that heavy canopy over the top. You can still see a couple 100 yards under that. That's, that was one way, to protect themselves and also to gather food. But that was it. And I saw it as, when we were using the fire as a tool, there was many reasons why we used, we do understory burns for white pine to bring new seedlings back, to reduce the duff. Mm-hmm. So those new seedlings could push through, to set back some of the brush, so it would they would grow taller, but also for burning for food, for blueberries. That was something that was always done by the Anishinaabe, and we can count that through history that they've used fire as a tool, as far back as we can count tree rings. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was important to bring that fire back here as a tool, but we had to approach the council with it, and the council gave us a year to educate our whole reservation on what we were going to do and how we were going to do it, and seek some of their input, on different places to burn and what we should burn there for. And that program, well, that was kind of started anew here when we started it, because fire had been removed here for over 100 years, through the state. And we couldn't use that tool anymore. We did it, some of the night burns were, under the table, but they were trying to accomplish things with that, especially out in the blueberry sites. And one of the stories I told us, we went out there and we went on an initial attack on a fire out there, and we found how they started it. It was pretty unique, and it was a rock inside of a piece of birch bark. So they lit the birch bark and they threw it across the wall. It worked. We had about a 15-acre fire, but it burned the blueberries, and a couple of years later, the blueberries are great out there, So, but yeah, that's why I got into it, and why I did it. It was, just to help bring that spirit back here on these reservations. And after a while, we went to all the reservations and we'd do prescribed fires for them. Mm-hmm. And the way I look at it is, when the Anishinaabe do it, it's a cultural fire. Of course, it's called a prescribed fire, and we have to write a prescription for that fire. But the Anishinaabe, they just did it at, they knew the weather, they knew, everything about that forest. So they knew when to burn, when they could let it burn. And that's shaped a lot of these forests around here. Anything else? Because I love
You covered a lot of my questions.
I love the subject,
Yeah.
something I did.
Well, and that's what I think a lot of people wonder, what's the difference between cultural burning and prescribed burning?
Well, just when I'm doing it, when a little Anishinabe's putting fire on the ground, it's cultural.
David, what are your thoughts on that?
So I love to be enlightened, and I love to have my mind blown, and I love it when I think a certain way about something, and then something comes along, or someone comes along to explain something to me that shifts my entire way of thinking about something. And I think fire has done that for me. I used to be able to, just walk through the woods and kind of be oblivious to the signs of fire and oblivious to its relationship to the landscape. And then as my relationship with fire evolved, I learned more and more about how landscape responds and how species respond, and learn more about our relationship to the landscape through fire, and how that narrative has been kind of extinguished, if I could use that word. Mm-hmm. So learning more about fire and our relationship to the landscape, and our deliberate lighting of fires to get certain results for millennia that have been going on in the Great Lakes area counters the manifest destiny, the colonialism, the westward expansion. All of those different mindsets are countered by the work that we're doing to show that we've had a relationship with this space for a very, very long time. So I'm a little, I don't know how to say the word, but like my goal with this stuff is to get people to think differently about our relationship to this world, and also to help revise the understanding of how this country came to be, and a lot of the different things that were experienced when Europeans came over here, and how things have been going for the past 500 years. Fire and our relationship with fire tells a different story sometimes of this space. So that's what I get at. I just love that stuff, where you see the forest today, and Vern talked about this, and we think that that's how it's always been, and it's not, and that's just the truth. And so what does that mean for us as people and our relationship to the landscape, and not just Anishinaabe people, but all people who have relationships to landscape? What does it mean to think about being separate from the landscape, or being a part of it, or maintaining it, or all these different things that come in? So I still have a lot more questions than answers, but that's what I love, and not knowing and working through it, and having the opportunity to do so. So that's my push for this, is to just get people thinking about it, and get people thinking about the narratives that are related to this country, the narratives related to the forest history of this country, and our relationships between cultures and things like that. So that's why that's why I like this stuff. So I was talking to some fluent language speakers, and we were talking about the things that we know today with the language and the culture and ceremonies and things like that, and talking about the things that the federal government or the governments came down hard on against us, and created laws to actually prohibit us from doing things. And so like ceremonies were part of that, language was part of that. We know that in boarding schools a lot of that stuff happened, but fire was one of the first ones. So fire, and so we know this. We know that Native people across this country utilize fire to maintain the landscape for whatever reason. If it was blueberries, if it was for regenerating areas for habitat, for game species, for opening, like all the different reasons to do it, right? It's been happening forever. When Europeans first came here, they talked about how they saw fire everywhere. There was
over 700 uses from the Indigenous people that were recorded.
Right. So seeing fire on the landscape for these Europeans was as foreign as taking daily baths, right? And they were just like, what are they doing? Anyway, I had to throw that in there. But really, it was happening everywhere, right? And so, but when the concept of land ownership, and this is mine and that's yours, and I'm going to do it on mine, what I want, and you do it on yours, what you want, but fire doesn't recognize those boundaries. So that was one of the first things that got legislated out, right, or legislated against.
Fire bad.
Yeah, fire bad. Or not even if it wasn't legislated, it was socially made to be socially unacceptable to just burn. And so the language with fire, the language associated with fire, the cultural practice associated with fire, the institutional millennial passed down knowledge, I don't know how to say that, but the knowledge that's passed down through millennia of relationships, through story, that just gets extinguished when there isn't that transmission, there isn't that practice happening anymore.
Right.
So the transmission of that knowledge and those relationships goes away. And so when you think about landscape fire and Indigenous use of fire on the landscape, just the understanding of that stuff is way back. It goes way back to be fully aware. I mean, you know what I mean? To be full practitioners of it. That's a long time ago, right? So I guess, in a way, what we're doing is reminding everybody today that we're changing how we think about this, right? We're changing how we think about fire on the landscape, to realize that it's a cultural practice all the time. Anytime we do this, I mean, culture is culture. Native people have culture, non-Native people have culture. I mean, that's what it is. So applying fire to the landscape is a cultural practice because it's a human relationship to the landscape. So yes, for sure it was individual people saying, I'm gonna burn this low prairie or whatever, but there were also leadership roles that helped to manage resources well. So but I see what you're saying, yeah. Just thinking about the different roles that we have in our tribal social governments. You have war leaders, you have social leaders, and you have spiritual leaders. And those social leaders and all those kind of together made decisions about what's going on and what we need to burn and when we need to burn and stuff like that. So but yeah, I think it was more of a kind of like a grassroots thing.
Yep. Yeah.
And through observation and the scientific process basically. And that's what we're telling people, like we have hypotheses and blah 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 and all this stuff, and we'll test our all that stuff. It's like, yeah, we did that too. We just did it in a different way.
Right.
Like our peer review was our families, and if we messed up, then our families paid for it. So the stakes were higher. So we tested hypotheses all the time, and we formalized practice through that. And so like that's what I mean again by like how much we've lost in terms of that relationship and our understanding of when to do things and when I mean, like they would have all known that, like known exactly when the time was to do all that stuff. And we're learning it again today. But yeah, don't get me going. Yeah, that's what that's what I mean again about countering these narratives is like, so the manifest destiny narrative, the Western expansion narrative of the United States of America is that, well, it's not being used. Look, there's no people here. It's just this open like park-like setting and there's nobody here. Like, not that they hadn't just died all from disease, but like, that was the idea, is that, this is how nature happens in the Americas, is that it's big trees and not a lot of stuff understory. So like this idea that natives were just wandering around collecting like nuts and stuff like that and having no impact on or in managing that is just crazy. Like they took deliberate action on the landscape because they knew that their families depended on that. And if they didn't, then they would starve. Like that's as simple as it gets, right?
Yeah.
And so like the entire management of the whole, every single square foot of the landscape of North America was managed for whatever reasons, right? So it's, again, like things like this help to bring understanding, which helps to bring kind of like conflict in people's minds and conflict in narratives, and then brings people to the truth of like what's really happening here. So I like that. It's such a circular way of explaining all of this because it's so hard to like, you can't like linearly explain this. It's like everything relates in all these different ways to explain how all this comes together.
Exactly.
So
this is going to be a question that maybe is more too big, but how do you envision that we, meaning land managers, cross-boundary, collaboration type of things, how are we going to start working together?
Well,
what are some of the things that you feel, and again, it can come from Anishinaabe tradition, but it also can come from just who you are and your experience of what you've seen on the ground. What's it going to take?
Well, I think one of the biggest drivers where we're going to have to make this change so we can do this more is climate change. We're getting droughts where, are getting more frequent. Our weather is just going crazy. But that climate change is changing all climate up here, where 20 years ago, the climate was like in Nebraska. But our weather is changing so much that we have the weather from Nebraska here during our summers. And usually, we could count on those cooler springs to do some prescribed fires, but now as soon as the snow is gone, we're in fire season right now. And those fires are going to grow. They're going to grow fast. So with this, we're putting more like a mosaic on the ground for the, like the clear cuts and fire. We're making those forests uneven aged, so they'll have less chance to burn, or if we can control them more. But that's what I see.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think to be honest with the way that we're headed right now, we're going to be forced to work together because there's not going to be an alternative.
Right.
So we'll have to. And I think though that, so we can either be reactionary with that or we can be proactive with that. But I think in order to be proactive, that the narrative around fire and our relationship with fire has to change. Because right now, the Smokey the Bear, the Bambi propaganda has been very effective, and people are afraid of fire. And so they turn on the news and they see even the way that fires are being characterized as being like destructive and monsters and negative. And it's like, that wouldn't have happened if we would have been, continuing to do what we've been doing for millennia, right? So, yeah, we do have different fires today than we would have had 100 years ago or 500 years ago, but part of that is because of us. So I think our relationship to fire and how we feel about it has to change as well. So I think, we're going to be forced to. It's going to happen. We're already seeing it. We're seeing it with out west. We're seeing it locally. But I think that not only the land management agencies and the decision makers, but it's just homeowners and people just who are participants have to also shift their way of thinking about fire as either being bad or destructive, and recognize that we can do this stuff. We can put fire on the ground and do it in a way that isn't going to threaten. We can do it in a way that's going to meet objectives and do it in a safe way, and not to be afraid of it. That we're going to have to come to terms with that pretty quick. Mm-hmm. So.
I ran across a really interesting statistic from a scientific study or whatever yesterday, and it kind of surprised me. They said that the majority, 80% of people actually are for prescribed burns.
Yeah, I was listening to public radio, and a lot of people are for it, for sure, but...
So what do you think it's going to take for us to move that? There's a lot of things involved as how can we put more fire on the ground?
Right. I think part of it is resources. Like you can only burn so much with the trained people that you have.
Especially in Minnesota, where you have such a narrow window.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to take a lot of support. Financial support, training support, and then the implementation support to make it happen. But it can be done for sure. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that thing again. Like, are we going to be forced into this, or are we just going to proactively make a choice to get ahead of it? Mm-hmm. And so we're still pretty much reacting to it. We're proactive in some ways, but it's going to hit us eventually harder. If we continue the trajectory that we're on. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. How can we, because one of the things that I keep coming up with too is that the capacity, the people who are trained to do this. That's where I see a big disconnect too, is how can we get more people trained? And this will probably lead me more into maybe some of the things you're thinking about for the Fond du Lac Reservation. How can we get...
Well, I would introduce some of that stuff in high school. Mm-hmm. And that's where our future lies there. Because all those guys like us, I'm retired, he's going to retire within 15 years or so. Mm-hmm. That's all going to be lost, and so I would start them younger, get some intern programs for high schoolers during the summer to do some shadowing on some of these fire managers and things like that. That way we'd expose them to it, and they would understand why we're doing it. Mm-hmm. And that's to me where we could start to meet this head on. Right now we don't have enough firefighters across the country. We're just throwing what we can at it while we can. And it's become like that war in Afghanistan. It's just going to keep going, and pretty soon you're running out of people. Mm-hmm. You have fire managers like I was, and then I have my own children on the same,
Okay.
And that's, so that's just one way I thought of how we can approach that. Also, involve, bring a lot more females into this. You know, that's what I would aim to do. Because right now we don't have, you know, we need that in our firefighting forces. You know, and we don't have enough of that. You know, I never, you know, in my whole career, I think I only seen one female crew boss my entire career. And I was like, wow, you know, why? You know, they're just as qualified as us, you know, work hard just as like us. But it's just the way that, you know, society looked at it, you know.
Yeah, I think that, again, like I try and, I mean, we can take like the in the weeds steps, and then I also try and think like big picture, like, again, we need to change what's normal with fire and what are in terms of how we feel about fire. And so like, you know, if you see somebody burning like, you know, you can even be on prescribed burns and people will see the smoke and they'll call it in because they think something bad's happening. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, that's what I mean. Our mindset about fire is so shifted to the negative that anytime we see, like if you saw somebody burning their yard, you know, most people would think, I got to call 911 because this is bad. It's like, well, maybe they know what they're doing and they're burning their yard.
Right.
But like our mindset is to go straight to like it's a bad thing. And that's what I mean about changing the normal of what, like, if we were all in a place where we could, like, I mean, I burn my own yard at home because I'm comfortable with fire moving through a landscape, so I can do that comfortably, and that's normal for me. And so I think that getting it to be more normal for people to be around fire is what it will take, because it's, you know, you can, mindset is, I think, is what's going to probably fuel a lot of the implementation of things like that, you know what I mean? But until we're still uncomfortable with it, like, you know, the kids aren't going to sign up for if we're all like thinking it's bad still. It's like,
Right.
so I don't know. There's a lot of like mind work that we got to do with this too, I think. And that's the thing. I mean, like, if you look at it even just from like a budget, like we spend so much more money on suppression of fires.
Right.
And if we put that money into prescribed burning, we could prevent a lot of that stuff from happening, or diminish the behavior, diminish the intensity of the fires that are happening now with putting money. Again, it's about being proactive and not reactive, and that's all we are right now. Is, well, not all of it, but
Yeah,
like,
we're just knee-jerk.
yeah, we react hard instead of like putting effort into preventing it from happening. I even have a hard time with the word firefighter. Like Paul and I have talked about this, like
Paul was saying. Yeah.
And that, again, that's just like, I mean, we do suppress fires, we do put out fires, but a lot of times, like,
We use fire.
like, yeah, and our initial, we were talking about like strategy on the Fond du Lac Reservation for wildfire starts. And so what we've done on other reservations is to immediately think big picture with an ignition that happens on an area, and think, should we, instead of suppressing this fire right now, should we go bigger picture? Should we go out to the next road and start burning it out? And so that we're basically like treating that area now. And so we can minimize any sort of behavior in the future. We can treat that as a unit instead of like, you know, again, like people show up to a fire and they got to go stomp it out. And it's like, well, wait a second, like we can actually work with it right now, and we can make it do what we want it to do, because we have the right, again, you know, when you learn more about it, you're like, yeah, this isn't anything. We can work this. So, you know, we can change our response, but that's got to be a collaborative thing too with, you know, if you have volunteer fire departments that show up and want to put your fires out right away, it's like, well, hang on. Like we can work it here. Let's work it. So
And maybe part of that is also including the volunteer fire departments in that training.
Oh, totally.
in that
Well, for sure.
understanding,
Yep. Yep.
That's where I go
Yep.
with that too.
But it's, again, like that's the mindset though.
Yep.
See fire, put it out.
Exactly.
Like don't even, there's no question about it.
Right.
Like it is, we're spraying water.
Right.
It's like, well, our strategy here in Fond du Lac is to like, think about it for a little bit. Like, can we do something with this fire right now? Even though if it was a human start or somebody being careless or whatever, or, you know, just screwing around, like, can we use this now? And do we have to put it out, or can we?
So in making that decision, I'm just trying to think again ahead of time, you know, how do you, and I'm putting it out there because I think a lot of people don't understand the strategic planning, the thought that goes into it before you even make that decision on when to prescribe burn or to let something run.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, you know, there's all the different aspects all the different factors that contribute to making decisions like that. And, you know, weather is one of them.
Terrain.
Any terrain, resources that you have, or any sort of like, what's the word? The like
Blowdown? Because we have a lot of that.
I was thinking like houses and stuff like that,
yeah,
or like
Sure.
structures or
Structures,
anything
yeah.
that you don't want to burn.
Right.
But like, and you're making those decisions pretty quickly. And I think what we're thinking about, like obviously if a fire is coming towards the building, we're going to knock it out. We're not going to allow that to happen
Right.
to the best of our ability. But like if we have an open field with nothing in it and there's a fire there, like let's think differently about this.
Yeah.
Like we can maybe do something here. So yeah, so I can qualify that. Like, yeah, obviously if there's fire coming at homes, we're gonna, and actually what we would do if a fire is coming towards a home, we would post up at that house and sit there with our fire engines and wait for that fire to come at us. We would burn out probably around that house to reduce all the fuels before it got to the house. And we're making those decisions like that.
Right.
But like, I wouldn't like sit in front of a house and say like, oh, let's just wait till it comes here. Let's make a decision about this. And it's like, no, we do that. You know, we'll take care of that. But I think there are some times where there's an opportunity for us to maybe use that fire to accomplish objectives that reduce the risk in the future.
Right. Well, I do think that's a big point that a lot of people do not understand is the thought process behind all that and the things that go into that decision. I mean, even when we're talking about prescribed burns, I know a lot of landowners will say to me, well, how come they didn't tell me, you know, how come they told me like the day before, you know? And it's like, you know, that's the part that people don't understand. And I think that we need to get more of that information out to people.
Yeah, I think it's probably, you know, it's a little bit of a confidence factor with landowners when they, you know, hear that you're putting fire in the ground again, because of, you know, the narrative is that it's going to destroy everything. But there's been a lot of research. I think at Missoula, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Paul, but out in Missoula, they've run fire through every single kind of fuel model that there is, meaning grass, shrubs, trees, and evaluated the rate of spread, evaluated what moisture is going to do to it, like all, like tons of factors on tons of different fuel models. And so we can predict pretty closely how a fire is going to behave in a certain fuel with a certain kind of weather and all that stuff. Like you can predict that pretty well. And so so the prescriptions are written with that in mind, and they're written to say like, with these weather factors and this fuel, you're gonna have a low intensity fire. Here's a moderate intensity fire, and here's a high intensity fire. So we probably aren't gonna be starting fires when it's a high intensity probability. We're gonna do a lower moderate, right? So like like I have confidence in burn plans because there's people that are smarter than me that figure that stuff out, and they knew what they were doing when they came up with these figures. And so we plug in our digits and stuff like that, and then output behavior results out of that. And then through that, we can understand whether or not I can take a shovel out and handle this fire if it escapes, or if that's not going to happen. And then we make decisions based on that. So I think when talking to landowners, like helping them to understand that that we've gone through all this, and it's been established, and it's pretty proven that we're going to see what we expect when we do this, so that we can. And what's super cool about burning too is that you can change behavior based on how you put fire on the ground with, drip torches and fuel and patterning and things like that, using the wind, using the topography, using fuel loading to do what you want. So when we go out there, we have usually every plan changes because you're always adapting, but for the most part, we have a pretty good understanding of what's going to happen when we do it. So, and that radio thing they're talking about, people that we're concerned about, but once they have a sit-down meeting and there's an opportunity for them to work with the managers and collaborate, they're like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty good. You just got to it's about education. So,
Well, and then with each plan, we build contingencies in there, and we make sure that we have enough resources, not just for day one, but if we go into like day 3, we can call in, these resources to help us either suppress it or else continue. But yeah, that's an important part. Is I always made sure I had 3 contingencies whenever I worked on a plan. I always made sure I had enough backup. And I was accused of empire building, but I always had a lot of people. I made sure we weren't going to lose this. So I didn't want to lose my matches. So, yeah. It was very important. Council was very strict on that when they told me that. Okay.
One of the obstacles or barriers that I see in Minnesota is liability.
That's a very big obstacle. But somebody has to be responsible for it if we're going to put fire on the ground. And especially if it's interagency, someone's going to have to take the lead there and take that gamble that we are putting fire on the ground, and our plan is solid, and we have contingencies. So yeah, but that liability is it's that's a legal word that it stops a lot of people from thinking beyond that. Okay, it's a liability. I don't want to be part of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so if we're looking in Minnesota, to me, it feels like we've got to do something to change that. We're one of the few states, as I understand it, here that have that very strict liability. Paul, you might know this better than I. Yep. And that is one of the things that I see as a major obstacle, isn't until we can change that. Yeah. So that's what I see.
Is the liability justified, or is it just like there's perceived risk and there's actual risk? Right? Like perceived risk is like, let's go paddle down the St. Louis River because it's going to be an easy thing to do. But the actual risk is like, it's pretty dangerous probably to do something like that. There's a ton of variables that you have any control over.
Right.
But like, would you rappel off of like a 100-foot building? You'd be like, no way, because the perceived risk is like, that's scarier than heck. But like the redundancy that's built into rappelling is more safe. You know what I mean?
Right.
So is the liability just, again, it's about this narrative about like, is there really the actual risk there, or is it a perceived risk? And then if the risk is true, then give us the equipment to mitigate it. I mean, we do a mitigation of risk. We walk out to our cars every day.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You gotta do, and again, like, okay, we can deal with this now. We can be proactive with this now, or we can be reactionary and do it. That was one thing about burning is like, if we can burn on our time, under our conditions, all the time, all the things are lining up right for us to do this and do it in a manageable way. Or we wait until a wildfire happens on like the worst day of the year when it's hot out and it's dry and it's windy, and then we're gonna have to deal with it. So it's like, I'd rather put fire on the ground when I can manage it and do it at a time So I don't know, it's just kind of backwards to me to think that way, that we have the tools, we have the confidence, we have the abilities to do this stuff in a way that mitigates the risk as much as possible. But the alternative is just waiting for it to happen and thinking that that's the way to do it.
No.
Bringing this back to like native culture, I don't know what it is, but I think the cultural practice of burning, the behaviors that we would have been seeing would have been less intense than because we would have been doing it every couple of years, so you don't get the fuel loading. So I think like the comfort level of natives with fire is, was higher than when Europeans were like, hey, what is this? What's going on? A lot of the early European folks into this area or on the eastern seaboard would talk about it in like fear of it. And but for the natives that were doing it was just like, yeah, it's just another day.
Right.
So that's what, when we talk about unnatural fire, like the conditions that existed for Hinckley, for Peshtigo, for Cloquet, like those are a direct result of the slash that was left over from logging that happened in this area.
Yep.
And so like the intensities again are different. We're talking about different intensities, not to diminish those people and their families and all the, everything that was lost, but like, let's talk about the truth of why that happened, how that came to be.
Right. That's,
Instead of just like
and that's the
perpetuating this
narrative
scary
that they should have.
Yep.
This fire, and if you almost think about it, that it was intentional. If you want to think about it, all that fuel laying there, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Before that, the Anishinaabe were burning patches all over the place. That's the way I see it. It was, those are terrible fires. And I know when it came through Sawyer, because they were burning around Sawyer before that, it came through Sawyer as a ground fire. It wasn't until it got west of, or east of Wild Rice Lake there on the highway, then it picked up, started crowning, and it just kept crowning till it blew into Cloquet.
Wow.
My grandfather was a fire warden here on the reservation in the turn of the century.
Really?
Yeah. And he fought fire, he was in the National Guard in Duluth. He fought fire in the 1918 fire in Hermantown.
Wow.
Wow.
He evacuated a boarding house there. And he was cited for bravery for that day. I didn't know all this till about 2 years ago, that he was in fire, into fire.
Yeah.
But he was hired by the government to be a fire warden on the reservation. There was three of them on the reservation here that were picked to do that job. And their job was to shadow the loggers and, make sure they took care of their slash. And I think that's why, the fire started out, it came across the reservation where it was just a ground fire, because they did manage to slash. And that's when it was really explosive.
Sure. So that brings me to the question, a lot of people in Minnesota, Wisconsin, our Great Lakes region, they think we're not going to burn up here. We're not going to look like California.
Well, you go look at the boundary waters.
What do you think?
Yeah. You look at the boundary waters where it's burned down to the rock. It'll be 100 years before anything grows here. But there's fire dependent plants up here, so we need that fire.
Right. And more the low intensity fire because of our soils up here.
Yeah. I think what's really, today we were touring the Cloquet Forestry Center, and we were talking about fuel loading, and fuel loading is the accumulation of
What's on the ground.
What's on the ground, the stuff that's going to burn, right? And so there's data, right? There's a bunch of data out there, but as fire practitioners and people who are around fire, you start to learn it. Like you learn how to drive a car, right? And you learn to observe what's going on, and you learn to see things and see relationships between fuel loading and intensity and things like that. And so I don't have the data, but I have the experience of 20 years of doing fire to see like, things are changing a little bit, right? And so that's what we're talking about with this cultural stuff too, is that like, we are all cultural beings. And for some of us, fire is part of our culture. And fire is we invest our time and our effort and our questions and answers to fire. And so, and because it's a high risk endeavor, you pay attention a lot, and you're always paying attention, and you're always watching, and you're always seeing how things are going. And so when things change, you're like, huh, that I haven't seen that before. We were out on a fire in Montana, and there was a bunch of, the fire was burning through logs, like huge logs. So and that's all it was burning. It wasn't burning the grass.
Wow.
It was so crazy to see that. We'd have entire logs completely consumed next to like just wavy grass, and we're like, how does that happen? Wow. Like things that we're encountering today are different than what not only out west where they're seeing the more explosive fire, but even around here. I mean, it's not hitting as hard here, but we're definitely seeing changes, and the trajectory again with what is going on is that it's going to start changing even more. And so it's not a question of if it's going to happen. It's just, when is that going to start happening? And basically, like our climate is going to be like Illinois, Missouri, and those are the ones that are having fires continually too now, and seeing a lot of that. So what? Like, why is it important to do this? Like, who cares? Because we could all be doing way easier jobs and making a lot more money. Right?
Yeah.
So why are we doing this? And fire people are kind of a weird bunch of people. We work long hours and get all grimy and like don't make a lot of money doing it, but we go back for more. And I think that there's a connection that's there, not only between fire people and other fire people, but our relationship to the landscape. And I think that's super important, especially for Native people. And then today with a lot of the social situations that are going on, strengthening our relationship to the landscape, but also reminding people that we do have a relationship to the landscape, and that our relationship to the landscape has been going on for a very, very long time. And so part of this for me with fire is about sovereignty as well, and about the exercising of our rights, and about carrying on traditions that have been going on for a millennia, and as far back as you can think. And so this isn't just about putting fire on the ground. This is about the relationship to landscape through fire that our ancestors have been doing for a very, very long time. So especially within the ceded territory and on reservations and things like that, like where we still have rights to hunt, fish, and gather, and other, what is the word? Hunt, fish, and gather, and other like rights of usual occupancy, which to me means management. It means not just happening upon a deer, but creating the conditions for those deer to happen upon us, right? So like we manage this space for a reason, and deliberate management to get known results, right? And that's, for me, that's like the thing, is like, that's what our ancestors have been doing, and that's our relation to this space, and we're gonna continue that, because that, to me, what that means is that if we create a space where blueberries are gonna be abundant, there are families that are gonna go there, and they're going to practice the ceremony that it takes to collect those blueberries, and those blueberries are not only gonna nourish them and their physical bodies, but also their ceremonial and spiritual relationship to the landscape. So like, this isn't, again, about burning for just because I like burning. This is about the language, the culture, the ceremony, everything that goes into doing this stuff. That's what this is about for me. So.
The way I think of it is our cultural closeness to a key, to the earth. That's one of the things that he was alluding to. It's our closeness. It's part of us. We are, since receive all those gifts from the Creator, it's up to us to perpetuate them, so our next generation will have that. So, yeah.
And if I can add to that too, it isn't just Native people, right?
Right.
We all have relationships to the world around us. And we are all shaped by the world around us, and the way we think about our relationship and our understanding of our place in this space is shaped by the world around us. And everybody, all of us, every single human can go back to a space where they're more closely connected to the landscape than perhaps they are right now. So it's in all of our DNA, this relationship. And every single person has this ability to reconnect to space. So I like to just remind people that it isn't just a native thing. Like this is a cross-cultural thing right now that we need you all to embrace as well.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like we need everybody to embrace this idea that we're in this landscape. We're a part of it. We manage it, whether or not we think we're deliberately managing or not. We are managing it, and so I think the idea is that we just recognize that and take the reins and do it.
Right.
Instead of just passively thinking it's going to happen. It's like, no, we actually have to actively do this. So that's what I mean about countering those ideas and countering those, the conception of those ideas of westward expansion and manifest destiny and all these different things that help, that are seen as kind of like our foundational justifications for this country, right? And so again, like us burning on landscape is in some ways, what's the word? An act of resistance, right? We're pushing up against those ideas, and we're reminding people that we're still here, and we're reminding people that we know what we're doing, and we know we can do it. Yeah.
We can do it. We can manage our.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is big stuff. It seems like it's kind of just like, I'm gonna go burn stuff, but like, there's a lot built into this, and there's a lot of, I think that's why I like doing it so much, is changing that narrative and changing the way we think about it.
So many people who have viewed the film already have come up with this question, and they, one, want to know, what is Damon doing?
Right.
And two, why is he putting a gas can on a propane burner?
Yeah, for sure. So I was asked by a family member to build a cradle board for a baby that they had just had. So part of building a cradle board is bending the headpiece, and we use white ash for that. And so you steam the white ash to make the bend in it. That's so like if the cradle board tips over, it's kind of like it's like a roll bar for the cradle board, right? And so we bend it in like a really intricate way, and you have to steam that wood for about a half hour or so. And so, Anishinaabe people are ingenious, right? And we don't just fester in the past, and we utilize tools that can make things more efficient or more easier to do something or safer or something like that. So I was steaming ash in the video there, and the can is again, like we just use what we can use. We're tinkerers, and we make things happen. And it had not even occurred to me that was like catching people off guard, that I was using that, because it's just what I do. I've been steaming wood for going on 20 years with making lacrosse sticks and cradle boards and things like that, and work with elders to get all that knowledge of gathering the wood and the ceremony that goes into that, and then making these items for people to continue our culture. And I just thought that was a normal thing to fill up a gas can full of water, because it fits perfectly into the steam box and all these other reasons. And I didn't even think of it being catching people off guard. But yeah, so it's basically full of water, and I'm heating it up on a burner to make steam to bend the wood. So it's all good.
Thanks.
Gas doesn't work as well for steam, so.
No. When it comes to a boil, you don't want to be around it.
Yeah, jeez.
Safety glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, wear your safety glasses.
Yeah, that's right.
No mix.
That's one actually kind of cool thing about the video is that, and something that I've heard from people talk about fire is that when you think about it, we use fire for everything that we do. Whether it's the combustion that's happening in your truck, the lights that are going on, cooking your food, you know, all those things are like, is literally fire. And so landscape fire is just another one of the tools that we have that we use for fire. So we can't get away from it. We use it all the time. So.
Yes,
I mean, really, right?
that's a wrap. All right, I want to say thank you very, very much, Damon, Vern, for
Yep.
being here.
You're welcome.
And we want people to know that if you are interested in learning more about Fond du Lac Fire Program, that they do have a website. Look under resources. And if you want to know more about fire in the Arrowhead region of Minnesota, we have a website called Arrowhead Fire Adapted Communities, and we will have a tab for Fond du Lac and Bois Forte and Grand Portage, we hope, as well, to find out more. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Miigwech.